want to be better with money, but dread the math? I get it. That's why this show is not focused on math, the markets, meme stocks, or even economic predictions. It is focused on how money fits into your daily life, from having healthy money conversations to caring for an aging parent. I'm Karen Coyne, certified financial planner professional and your host of Money Without Math. Join us for conversations that are practical, sometimes philosophical, and always fresh. Learn more about me at raymondjames.com/clarity, and be sure to subscribe.
Let's talk about bad advice. Whether it's from friends, family, coworkers, social media, there's no shortage of information out there. And with that, there's no shortage of advice. And with that, there's no shortage of bad advice. And when it comes to financial advice in particular, this is where it gets really tricky, because we're not talking about the difference between like a bad lip gloss or, a car mat or something innocuous like that. Like, this could be really, really impactful. So to have this conversation today, I've invited fellow financial planner and advisor Melissa Joy. She is the founder and president of Pearl Planning, based out of Dexter, Michigan. And she's also a fellow podcast host of Women's Money Wisdom, the recipient of numerous accolades, too many to mention here. And last but not least, my very, very good friend. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi, Karen. I'm so glad to be here.
Yay. I'm so glad you're up for talking about bad advice.
You know I wouldn't miss it. I have a lot of opinions on this.
So let me tell you where I had this thought, why this came up recently. So I was talking to someone I know who recently bought a new vehicle, a nice vehicle, like a good, nothing crazy, but like a solid new vehicle. Something they'll probably have for years and get good use out of. And she started apologizing. She said, I know they say you shouldn't buy new, it depreciates and you shouldn't do this, but, and I was like, whoa, stop right there. Like, A, who is they? B, what do they know about you? And this is just a perfect example of people giving bad advice, because this doesn't apply to you.
Well, okay, can we start right there? You went right to a place I wanted to talk about, which is, I don't know if it's more women. I certainly am sensitive to bad advice for women especially, but what about those shoulds? Like, that is a thing, the shoulds. Like, I have a right to judge you. I have a right to tell you why you're wrong with no corresponding information or context. And so I feel like for our listeners today, if you get shoulded, you should have done this, you should have done that. That's not the way I would have done it. With, addition of judgment, that is not the place you should be looking for advice. And I know that's not the way you practice, Karen. It's certainly not the way I want people to come to me.
Oh, yes, 100%. And I'm glad you called that out immediately. I think I did a separate podcast episode just on the shoulding way back when, because I feel
I probably got it from you.
No, I don't know. I mean, I certainly didn't create it, but it does really irk me, and it is one of those things that really deeply bothers me. And it's so, how many times a day do you hear from someone, I shouldn't be doing this, or I shouldn't say that, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. And you're right, it's not helpful when you're coming from a place of being shamed. That certainly is not a good motivator. Shame is not a good motivator. It's not going to help someone make better financial decisions. So there's that. The shoulds, especially without knowing your situation, are just problematic and counterproductive.
Well, and do you get this? Sometimes I feel like I need to duck when I walk into a room and people know I'm a financial planner, because I always tell clients when I start to work with them, because I work in a small town, as I know you do kind of too, a small city. You don't need to cross the street and hide from me if you've got a bunch of shopping bags when we're walking down the street across from each other. Like, there's no judgment there. And there are so many assumptions about the way that good advice is delivered, but it certainly does not start with shoulds or should nots.
Very, very good call out. Should not start with shoulds. The other thing is, one of my top beefs is that, so much financial literacy, rightfully so, speaks to, eliminating debt, building emergency savings, all these foundational things, which is great when you're starting out and building. But for folks who've reached a certain level of success, they're no longer in that survival mode or emerging from survival mode. They've far surpassed that. So much of that basic information no longer applies to them.
It's so true. And I know hopefully you're leaving me an opening to talk about the messy, muddy middle, because that's where I feel so passionate. I'm sitting in it today. I just turned 50. I've got, tweens and teens. Everything's expensive. We're successful, but also things are not simple. And I hear this from my clients every day when they come to me and they're like, it should be easier than this. I thought we'd have it all figured out by now. But the conventional advice that you see, if you pick up a how-to book about personal finance, if you are watching, a personal finance show on YouTube or something like that, is so binary and so like basic and beginner that I feel like we've missed out on how to give good money advice for that messy money middle for successful people who do have choices, but it's just not that easy.
Yes. And I feel like part of the reason why it's not that easy is going back to that shame that we've already addressed. There's this moral equivalency that begins to grow with making deposits equals good, but taking money out and using it is bad, even when you're taking it out of your emergency fund for an actual emergency. It's like this has just seeped into your consciousness that this is good, this is bad. I shouldn't be taking money out of this account, even though it's for an emergency. And that comes from, again, well-intentioned, well-meaning advice, but it's all about and geared towards those people who are in the beginning phases and not the ones who far, far surpass that stage. And similarly, this person I was speaking to about buying a new vehicle, they were in that stage where they had far surpassed, the rules that apply maybe when you're 22 and just starting out. So,
let me give you an example that comes to my mind that I see frequently. One example is that I see people who were so great at saving early because their parents instilled it in them. They started that Roth IRA. They, went straight to 10% when it came to their retirement plan. Maybe they did family formation a little later. One of the primary examples I can think of is a doctor that we work with. And then they get to this time frame where their cash flow is great, but their expenses are greater. And, they're putting 40, 50,000 into retirement accounts because they have multiple options in their case. And it's like, you guys, like, retirement is figured out. We can actually ease up on the retirement lever, and we need to accelerate the current cash flow lever of the amount that gets dumped into your bank account instead of put away for your future. And one of the things that I'm reminded of is you need to be flexible and resilient. You need to be open that is not a failure. That is what is right for right now. And actually your past good deeds are creating this opportunity for you. But, again, you could tell your colleague at the water cooler about it and they'd be like, oh my gosh, they have no idea what they're doing, when it's actually great advice.
Right. Yes. So true. I mean, sometimes it makes more sense not to max out. But if you're talking to all your peers who are doing that, they're going to say, oh my gosh, Melissa, what are you doing? You're crazy. Like this is what you should be doing.
Yes.
Lather, rinse, repeat. Why do I feel like this is going to come up with like every piece of bad advice?
Well, and everybody has different things that they value, right? Like, if you value shopping at a high-end grocery store, or if you value a great wine collection, or experiences with your family and kids are what matter most to you, then nobody has a right, or you wanted a fancy car. As long as you can afford that, then nobody has the right to judge. There's not, and a great financial planner would not lay on, those aren't my type of clients. They would really leave a blank slate for you to be, you to say what you value, give you space for that. And then also like let go of the things that everybody else values that you do not care about at all. That
100%.
Instagram tells you you have to value.
Yes. And let me just add to that, sticking with the cars for a moment, because so I had a vehicle that I was planning to keep for like 10 years, but about the 8-year mark, it became evident that I was going to have to trade it.
You're going to have to break up.
We had to break up, as sad as it was. But shortly after, I'm in my new vehicle, maybe within the first 6 months, I'm coming around, going through the mountains where, sometimes you're coming around a corner, you can't really see what's ahead of you. And I see a bunch of brake lights. There are a bunch of cars that are pretty much at a near halt on the highway, on the interstate. And, I'm going a decent speed. I'm going the speed limit-ish. So I've got to slam on my brakes now because I'm coming careening around this corner and I see vehicles just shortly, a little bit in front of me that are at a near stop. And so I have to slam on my brakes. But guess what? With my new vehicle, all the auto features kick in. The auto brake, the auto, like
the beepers.
Oh my gosh. Like everything goes off and it's a little unnerving because I've not experienced this before. My older vehicle didn't have all that. But I was thinking this new vehicle just saved me from being the filling of a 7-car pileup because that is what would have happened in my other vehicle. The brakes were not, and all of that wouldn't have kicked in as quickly. I would have most certainly been in a collision. And, and I was thinking so much of that basic information that we see, and in particular, how many tweets, how many posts have you seen about if you aren't driving a Honda Accord or a Camry that's got 300,000 plus miles on it, you're financially irresponsible. Like, how dare you even think about buying a new car? That's so financially irresponsible. And I'm like, no, what's financially irresponsible is not taking care of yourself and your health because you want to drive this old vehicle instead of one that you can afford that's going to keep you and the people around you safe. So talk about like values. I mean, there comes a time where I think you can weigh what's more important, being in a, having like the safety and the features that are available to me that I can afford. If assuming that you can afford them. Otherwise, why would you put yourself at risk just to shore up your balance sheet when your balance sheet is already in great shape?
Yeah, I've always bought cars new, and I know that's not what the advice that many people give. But I've also driven them a long time. I've only driven 7 cars in my life, if I'm counting correctly. I was thinking as you were describing your story. And most of the time it worked out because I did, end up driving. I just hit the 5th anniversary for my current car. But I did get in one of those horrible accidents where I couldn't avoid being hit by somebody from behind who was going way over the speed limit on a highway about a year after I bought the car before this one. And obviously the math doesn't work out when you drive off of the lot and you're only 15,000 miles in. But that car saved me. I went and bought a brand new car with all the same safety features.
I remember that.
Yeah. And it's totally, that's okay for me. And it's also like, you can do anything, not everything. You can buy new, but if you're going to flip a new car every 2 to 3 years, that math doesn't tend to work out. Over my lifetime, will the math work out if I drive my cars a long time and buy them new? It'll be just fine. And so again, people would be tending to come to us with the shameful, like, oh my gosh, I leased my car, I'm sorry, or, whatever you choose to do. And that's okay, especially as long as your overall financial life is in control and you're able to support your life and your lifestyle and your family's needs.
Yes. So anyway, a lot of that to say the car one is one of my top pet peeves. Because it comes up a lot. But
a lot. Yeah.
A lot. What are some of your other takes on bad advice?
Oh, well, I mean, not to get into gender, but to get into gender, I feel like a lot of advice, there's not enough women talking about money. And because of that, there isn't a recognition of some of the challenges that we have. One of them is like, who's the first person in the family, regardless of their education and position, to be encouraged to stay home. It's often the woman like, hey, I can solve this math problem. The daycare is really expensive. And if your wife stays home, the financial planner says to the husband, while the wife may or may not be in the meeting, that it will work out great. And we just see in so many, I love encouraging people to do whatever they want to do, but you do need to be talking about the trade-offs. In a dual income family, going down to one income can work. If you ever become single unexpectedly due to divorce or widowhood, that math may come back to bite you, things like that. So
Yep.
I often struggle with financial professionals who focus on, like, for example, one type of career, knowing that there's another partner who may or may not be their area of focus. And often, or in many cases, those are the women in the relationship. So I just really want more advice to take into consideration women's lives over time and not just in a moment in time. And I want more women to be a part of the conversation and podcasts like this. In our financial profession, I want us to have a louder voice because advice, just like clothes, if you only made them to fit for men, wouldn't be great for women. Neither is financial advice if it really is tailored toward, what the advisor knows, which is, himself.
Yeah, well, and look at what we're finding out about medical advice and how much research has been done not on women. And so all these takeaways, but they were, as a result of studies that didn't even include women. So
Yeah. And I mean, we're like sitting in your 40s and 50s, perimenopause and menopause kind of got excluded because you have to cover like childbirth and obstetrics. So there's like no time left in the GYN like
yeah,
rounds to cover this area that nobody studied. So,
yeah,
and I mean, same goes. I wish there were more studies about how few voices for women and on behalf of women are in financial professions. I don't think the studies have happened. And so we just need more advice that is empathetic and can see the perspective. You don't need to be a woman to give that advice, but you need to be trained to recognize that you may have biases. And I mean, I know I have my own biases working with men and women, as I know you do
oh yeah, we all
too.
do, right? I mean, it's unavoidable, but I appreciate that call out. And I'm sure you're right. I doubt there has been research that's been done on that because we've been a minority in this field for so long. So I don't,
I mean, interesting research in meeting minutes from Federal Reserve governors. Women speak less. They are Federal Reserve governors. They speak a less percentage of time than male Federal Reserve governors. Like, we have to shrink ourselves in so many cases, but the cost of shrinking ourselves when it comes to the advice delivered to women, to more than half of the country, to people who are controlling more and more financial wealth, the cost is too high. So we just need advice that is more empathetically and contextually trained to include the perspective of women. So bad advice is when it doesn't include the perspective of women and it's just, a blanket calculator.
yes. And to that, I will say a dovetail, which is, a lot of women believe that they are conservative. They have to be more conservative because they're a woman. And it's like, where did this even come from? And I have a theory on where it came from. In part, that it came from people who were impatient and didn't
Mm-hmm.
take the time to sit down with a woman and give her maybe a little bit of education and a little bit of understanding. And because what I have found is that if two people come to me, let's just say a male and a female, and they both say, I have XYZ objectives, and I have XYZ concerns. And the male will typically say, I'm comfortable with growth. And the female might typically say, I'm conservative. But in the end, when we actually, let's say we present a balanced model, they both are okay with it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's all about the perception. He's seeing that as, okay, it's, 2/3 growth. And she's seeing it as, okay, I've got some, 1/3 defense in there. And it's all in the lens. But when women have been labeled as risk averse for so long, they buy it, even when that's really, I find, not the reality. Or they might be risk adverse in terms of, as Sally Krawcheck put it, risk aware. They're much more, they want to understand. They want to look before they leap. They're willing to say, hey, I don't understand this stuff. Can you help me understand? So I have a, clear view of what I'm getting into, what the risks are, et cetera. But at the end of all that, they're not necessarily so conservative that they're not willing to take risks. Quite the contrary.
Yeah, they may be inexperienced. They may not have been given the keys to make their financial decisions. I think another piece of bad advice is taking away the authority and control for people, men or women, but it often happens with women where, it's like, oh, I'll take care of you. If you hire me, I'll take care of everything. And really, you should never, kind of give up full control or autonomy for your decisions. You need someone who is going to help you narrow down the decisions, assist you with deciding confidently, and then someone who will help you execute on that. Because oftentimes, that's where you need to delegate, is like, okay, I got to get this game plan done. Can you help me out with that without ceding control?
Yeah. I find that the best relationships, the best client relationships are those that are collaborative, like there's some give and take. It's not one-way street in either direction. But what that reminds me of is actually another form of bad advice, which is you don't need a financial advisor because, I know what I'm doing. So if we're in a relationship that's, we don't need a financial advisor because I've got this under control. It's all right here. And if you can't see me, it's all up here in my skull, in between my ears. And, if you're the spouse and you're the point person and you've got it all in your head, that's okay to some degree until it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I always think, like, I guess you're getting toward the same place. There's some people that just, like, I got this all figured out. And I feel like maybe they have nailed one section, like low cost investing is best, but they don't have full control over how much do we need for retirement? Should I pay down that debt or save for the kids' college? All the areas of financial planning, many of them get ignored because there's only so much space and time to be kind of an amateur personal finance guru for yourself. But there's also, a very clear cost, hopefully, for most financial engagements. It's not hidden in commissions, or it shouldn't be. It should be, clear what you pay. And that cost is tangible, and it's intangible to understand the value of working with a financial professional. It's less easy to discern, oh, this person's going to tell me to save more in a certain way, and thus my taxes will be lower. They're going to steer me away from making shifts in my investment allocation during a really bad market so that I am still invested in the same way when the market recovers. Those are more difficult to quantify. They're an opportunity cost. And so many people, this is another you shouldn't, or you should do it yourself when it comes to implementing your investments. Maybe you could pay for a little bit of advice when you need it, but otherwise you should, you really should steer clear. And that is a fit, in my opinion, for 10 to 15% of the population for a portion of their lifetime, probably not at the end of life, which is another risk. But there is no shame for people that's not a fit for, or who have different circumstances that is more complicated, more taxable, more et cetera. And so that's a huge piece of bad advice, like DIY, and only in case of emergency get the help of a professional. Imagine if we all did that for taxes, right, or oil changes or car repairs or anything else.
Yes. I mean, obviously we're a little bit biased since we're both financial professionals.
Totally
but
biased.
Even we recognize that, right. No, not everyone needs us. Not everyone is going to benefit from our services, but don't assume that you don't either. And even if it's not in this current season of life, things change. And at some season in your life, it may make sense, and it may be, in ways that you don't even imagine, because it's so much more than just investing.
Well, I can think of an example of a client who had $2 million or more in cash in a bank account. And family members were saying, just make sure you don't pay somebody to invest on your behalf. And these family members had always had a 401k plan that they continued to use as their primary source of wealth, and were happily retired in a very, in great shape. But these are not the same circumstances as someone who needs to make tax-aware investing decisions starting from scratch with all cash, and make it work in a situation where this money, kind of needed to be a retirement fund and last for somebody who was in their 30s. And so it was well-intended advice from the family members, but it wasn't practical advice in that circumstance for that person. And fortunately, she chose to, consider different options, I think, where there was a much more holistic game plan set up that allowed those funds to be used now and over time, but it really has a super solid retirement game plan and a lot taken care of when that money in the bank was overwhelming and difficult. Even though it seems like it should be like a massive party due to a windfall, it felt like an obligation that she did not know where to start from.
Yeah. And that's the thing with the investing where people, online love to say, oh, you shouldn't pay anyone. You just index and chill. And it's like, okay, maybe for you, if you've got it all figured out, great. But, maybe your sibling doesn't feel the same way. Maybe your spouse doesn't feel the same way. Maybe it would give them some comfort to have a little bit of guidance around that and a better understanding of what they own and how it's going to behave. And maybe it's okay today, but when the market decides to take a dip and it's down 35%, how are you guys going to feel about it at that time? So that's the part where I really just get crazy, is just because it works for you, that's great. I'm glad that you feel so confident in your investing, abilities and perhaps your ability to also ride out the storm, et cetera. But, not everyone feels that way. And for many, it is a huge burden to make those decisions. And again, even, or maybe less of a burden today, but now, once we're in a recession, even more so, most likely. I mean, if it was tough at the beginning, it's going to be even more difficult once you hit that your first recession wave.
So true. There's another cohort of people that I think are getting financial advice in the old school way. So we've both been in the business for a couple decades, and I feel like 25 years ago, if you could just like help people form an asset allocation that was kind of new and get like very basic retirement projections into software, it was a lot in terms of service. But the game has been stepped up, and we have a lot more obligation as a modern financial planner to serve multiple areas, not just, like it's table stakes to give good investment advice, but there's so much more in our jobs. And I feel like, just because we both know that the profession is kind of like assets stay sticky with advisors, whether they're doing a great job or not, there's so many people being served by advisors that like barely touch investments and just like leave them the way they sold them, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And that cohort too, I think, is bad advice to not get proactive consideration for your current circumstances, current tax law, the way your life is going. If your advisor tells you, oh, sure, you can retire, but doesn't tell you how much you can take from what account per month, things like that, then you're probably missing out and paying as much or more as you could pay someone to give you more comprehensive, thoughtful, modern advice.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, I mean, what would you say is to someone who's listening and thinking, okay, well, how do I know if what I'm hearing is bad advice, whether it's from another advisor, from my friends and family members, from what I'm seeing online? Like, do you have any thoughts as to help gauge that, like a litmus test?
If you're living in fear because of money, which I know so many people are, the imposter syndrome when it comes to money is so prevalent. Then you should reconsider your sources. If you're being sold products, if you're being pushed in a way that doesn't feel comfortable and it feels like a sales pitch versus a consultation, and a point of sale versus relational over time, that is a warning sign. If if you feel like you're not heard, if you feel like you're being spoken to in gibberish and, kind of financialese, instead of, if you're not comfortable saying, hey, can you stop there? Because what you just said, I have no idea what it means. Can you explain it in a different way? If you feel like you'll be talked down to if you ask that question, that is a problem. If you can't tell the financial professional that you're working with how you really feel and your vulnerabilities in addition to your successes, or if you feel like you can't show your full self, that is an issue. There's so much. I know that's a laundry list, but and if you're being told you should do it yourself but you just do not know where to start, know that like DIY might be perfect for the person giving the advice, but they haven't taken a minute to ask whether you want their advice or whether they are understand your circumstances to give that advice.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the one thing I would add to that is, of course, if it sounds too good to be true. I mean, the very adage that we learned when we were kids is still true. If it sounds too good to be true, it absolutely is. I mean, that is.
Yeah, if you're getting advice on something where you don't understand, you think that person's being paid, but you're not sure how. It's a lot of focus on here's how to avoid horrible risks. Or there's a lot of overselling. Things aren't as publicly traded. They're not as transparent. All of those things are warning signs where you should look for a second opinion.
Okay. So we've covered a lot already. As I knew we would, Melissa, any last closing thoughts before we wrap on bad advice?
Well, even though we have a lot of opinions on advice, there's a lot of ways to receive good advice. And so nothing is one size fits all, but you should know if you feel like you are able to decide more confidently, if you feel like you're being informed and have the possibility of making good decisions, that means you're probably on the right track. If you don't, there should be options. Someone like Karen, myself, or communities of certified financial planners who we know and are in network and friends with all offer, modern advice in a way that is meant to meet you where you are.
Yes, love that. Meet you where you are. I think that's probably one of the ways that we approach business a little bit differently. And so I love that you articulated that and called that out as a great place to wrap. So, Melissa, thank you for joining me today.
Well, I love talking with you, business case or not. Karen, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for listening. Please follow us on Spotify if you're not already, so you don't miss any future episodes. We'd also love for you to rate the show while you're there. Connect with us on social. Search Karen Coyne CFP on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have feedback or if we can be of service in any way, please let us know. And now for the standard disclosures. Opinions expressed are those of Karen Coyne and not those of Raymond James Financial Services or Raymond James. Securities offered through Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors Incorporated. Clarity Planning is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services. Karen Coyne Financial Advisors, located at 12920 Connemara Drive, Suite 202, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21742. Phone 301-739-7002.
Any opinions expressed by Melissa Joy are not necessarily those of Raymond James. Raymond James does not endorse Melissa Joy or Pearl Planning. This podcast is for informational purposes only.